Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Thanks for being here. We will get to China and Iran later in the program with our great guests as well. But before we do, there's a lot that's been going on here in the homeland, and a lot of it's very ugly. It's the sort of thing we've seen overseas. People marching in the street, praising terrorists, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, intimidating Jews, violently attacking Jews at their synagogues, in their neighborhoods, attacking the NYPD. Now, this isn't the only place it's taking place, but it clearly is one of the primary points of this attack on our society. And why not? You have a mayor who's an Islamist Marxist and who's basically green-lighted this activity. He doesn't condemn it unless he's forced to condemn it, and he does it in quiet whispers. He also has taken steps to ensure that the Jewish community is not protected. And he's done other things that are pretty damn outrageous, too. That's Zohran Mamdani. I want to talk a little bit about this in a different context here, because there's a rising tide of virulent anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, also Christian hatred, America hatred, and we're seeing it intensify now like we haven't seen it in American history, as far as I know. And the reasons for this are the Marxists who are spreading their lies about America, and they also spread anti-Semitism and faith hatred and American hatred throughout our colleges and universities, and people are being graduated through these systems of indoctrination. Also, people have come into this country with a Marxist mindset. We've also imported people in this country who are Islamists, who hate America. This is part of an ideology, part of a revolution by immigration, and it's taking place in a very significant way. We see the building strategically in certain locations of segregated communities, Islamic communities, mosques, and so forth. Every day, we have clips, one after another, of imams and so-called scholars and mayors and others saying the most horrific things about our country and praising Hamas. So I want to get into this, and I want to first start with our history, our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. To understand our history is to have a basis for really pushing back against this. Our Declaration is based on Judeo-Christian belief systems. There's simply no question about this. In fact, I want to recommend to you The Jewish Roots of American Liberty, and they also talk about the Christian roots of American liberty in this excellent book, and it's written by two great scholars, and it's put out by Encounter Books that put out smart books, and it talks about how the revolutionaries early on, the founders of our nation, they could quote from what they called the Hebrew Bible and, of course, what they called the Christian Bible. They could quote from the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. They could quote from the Torah. That's how important it was to our founders. And that's basically reflected in the Declaration of Independence, as well as the embrace of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment also comes from Judeo-Christian belief systems. So whether you're a Christian or a Jew, whether you're something else or whether you don't believe in anything, if you're an American, you can thank the founders for embracing Judeo-Christian values and belief systems to create this nation, which is tolerant, which embraces diversity and free speech and freedom of religion, and freedom of association. That's where it all comes from. And yet it's under attack. But I want you to know, early in our history, this was understood. I have a great piece here from the tablet, Charles Johnson, and he writes, George Washington knew the Old Testament well. His favorite book was Micah. His favorite verse was section 4. But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of the hosts have spoken. It appears no fewer than 11 times in his diaries. He invoked it again in his famous letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport in August 1790. He said, "May the children of the stock of Abraham, Jews, who dwell in this land, continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, Well, everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid, he said. He grounded America's experiment in religious freedom in a Republican theory. The government of the United States, he said, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it, on all occasions, their effectual support. In so doing, Washington became, as scholar the late great Harry Jaffa put it, the first secular ruler to call Jews his countrymen. Washington's principal advisor, Alexander Hamilton, publicly extolled Jews, under whom he studied as a boy on the island of Nevis. He saw in their suffering and success evidence of, quote, some great providential plan, unquote. To discredit them, he said, would destroy the Christian religion, Hamilton later argued in a debate, because of the connection of Judaism with Christianity. President John Adams and his son John Quincy Adams agreed with Hamilton, writing separately and favorably of Jews in a Jewish state long before it was fashionable, to Mordecai Manuel Noah, America's first Jewish consul, founder of New York University. Oh, what he would think of NYU today. And his day's most famous Jew. Quote, I will insist that the Hebrews have contributed more to civilized men than any other nation, John Adams wrote to F.A. Vanderkamp, a Dutch-born Enlightenment thinker, condemning the anti-Semitism of Enlightenment writer Voltaire. He said, if I was an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilization, the nations. Jews are the most glorious nation that ever inhabited this earth. The Romans and their empire were but a bubble in comparison to the Jews. They've given religion to 3/4 of the globe and have influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. Because he understood and believed, as so many do today, that without the Jewish faith, there would not be the Christian faith. Jesus was a Jew, and he made that point over and over and over again. I'm not doing this to promote one faith over another. I'm explaining our history, the American history. President James Madison also studied Hebrew, electing to spend an additional postgraduate year to focus on it. During the Revolution, Madison turned to Chaim Salomon, a Polish-born financier, Jewish, who offered loans well below market rate to members of the Continental Congress. They were going broke because they were fighting. Madison borrowed from him, others borrowed from him, and he never got paid back, by the way, and he died broke. Writing to fellow Virginian Edmund Randolph in September 1772, he praised Solomon's generosity, quote, the kindness of our little friend in Front Street, that would be Solomon, near the coffee house is a fund which will preserve me from my extremities. But I never resort to it without mortification, as he obstinately rejects all recompense. In many cases, he forgave all loans. Solomon was captured by the British and condemned to death, but he escaped by bribing the guards with gold. Solomon wasn't alone among Jewish patriots. Indeed, it's fair to say that Jewish finance underwrote much of the cost of the American Revolution, something the unjustly neglected President Calvin Coolidge noted with favor in the dedication of the Jewish Community Center on May 3, 1925. He said their generosity, often never repaid, came because the Jewish faith is predominantly the faith of liberty. Coolidge declared, and I quote, from the beginnings of the conflict between the colonies and the mother country, they were overwhelmingly on the side of the rising revolution. He listed the merchants, overwhelmingly Jewish, who cast their lot with the colonists in signing the Non-Importation Resolution of 1765, also known as the Stamp Act, which directly taxed American colonists by restricting their freedom of commerce. Hebraic mortar cemented the foundation of American democracy, Coolidge said. The patriots who laid the foundation of this republic drew their fate from the Bible. Every inheritance of the Jewish people, every teaching of their secular history and religious experience draws them powerfully to the side of charity, liberty, and progress. The list of pro-Jewish statements evincing serious thought about Jews could go on and on. Harry Truman said, I had faith in Israel before it was established. I have faith in it now. And the occasion was David Ben-Gurion's visit to the White House. He said, "I believe Israel has a glorious future before it, not just as a sovereign nation, but as an embodiment of the great ideals of our civilization." With words like this, there could be little doubt as to Truman's position on Israel. But just to be clear, he made sure that America was the first nation to recognize it. And I can go on and on and on. Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's advocacy of civil equality for American Jewry began as early as 1776 when he co-sponsored a bill which the Virginia legislature ultimately defeated, which would have allowed the naturalization of Jews, Catholics, and all other non-Protestants as Virginia citizens. During the debate, Jefferson quoted John Locke's argument that neither pagan nor Mohammedan nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth because of his religion. 4 decades later, in 1820, Jefferson wrote to the Charleston Jewish physician, Dr. Jacob de la Mata, that religious freedom is the most effectual anodyne against religious dissension. Jefferson told him that he was delighted to see American Jews assuming full social rights and hoped they will be seen taking their seats on the benches of science as preparatory to their doing the same at the Board of Government, and he goes on. The founders, Coolidge, Truman, so many others, and Donald Trump. I want you to look at this short campaign ad for Donald Trump that talks about his father, Fred.
Brooklyn, across the river, the city of friendly people sometimes called Dodgerville.
In 1955, Holocaust survivors looking to begin their new lives were arriving by the hundreds in Brooklyn. They quickly outgrew their synagogue that was run from a garage, prompting their rabbi to meet with the building's owner, Fred Trump. Today, the Beach Haven Jewish Center stands strong on a plot of land given to the Jewish community for $10 by Mr. Trump. Fred Trump made it his priority to help construct the solid brick synagogue to provide a lifelong place of worship to survivors arriving from Poland, Germany, and Austria. And their families still worship there today, passing by a simple plaque on the wall that reads, "Fred Trump, Humanitarian." 62 years later, Donald Trump followed in his father's footsteps to help erect another building, the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. Israel has no better friend than President Trump. On November 3rd, vote to honor the loving legacy his father gave to the Jewish people. Vote for Donald J. Trump for president.
Of course, Donald Trump's done a lot more than that, hasn't he? In fact, the list is too long to even complete during the opening of this program. But I will remind you, Executive Order 13899, which he signed in 2019, this order explicitly interpreted Title V of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to apply to discrimination rooted in anti-Semitism. First time in half a century. And also, it warned universities that failing to protect Jewish students from discrimination and harassment could result in the loss of federal funding. Executive Order 14188 that he signed last year, his first year in his second term. He signed that. It reaffirms the first executive order and directed additional measures in the wake of October 7, 2023, Hamas's terrorist attacks and the subsequent wave of campus protests and visa cancellations, denaturalization, deportations of people who are involved in this kind of conduct and activity. Absolutely remarkable. Now, I want to get to the point. That's a very brief history on our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I want you to take a look at what's been taking place in New York City for the last 2 weeks, especially the last week, what's been going on here. I want you to see the Islamists and the Marxists carrying signs of Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist groups, even Iran, what they're doing. This is a Jewish community, Jewish synagogue, under attack. This looks like Middle East. This looks like someplace in Europe that's been conquered. Maybe Paris or London and so forth. Here's more. To be clear, they're attacking these people because they're Jewish. For no other reason. Because they're Jewish. And many of them are shouting and celebrating Hamas. Hamas. All right, I've seen enough. Now, I want you to listen to the head of CARE. This organization was founded outside of the Philadelphia International Airport at the Marriott Hotel. And it was a Hamas meeting, and they decided to create this group, CARE. I've got report after report. The Hamas network in the United States of America, CARE, which was birthed by Hamas in the United States, the history of CARE, why it's important. They have an entire network, Hamas, in the United States of America. Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Their tentacles are in every city, in every state in the United States of America. Their tentacles are in the Democrat Party. Their tentacles are in the media. It is a terrorist front group. That's what it is. For a terrorist organization, Hamas, part of the mothership, the Muslim Brotherhood. I want you to listen to what he said about October 7th. Go.
So I hope, unlike so many people who only woke up to October 7th, the people of Gaza have been aware and living every day of October 6th, 5th, 4, 3, 1, and September 31st, and all the way to 1956. The people of Gaza only decided to break the siege, the walls of the concentration camp, on October 7th. And yes, I was happy to see people breaking the siege and throwing down the shackles of their own land and walk free.
So he was happy to see October 7th, breaking the siege and so forth and so on. He was happy to see it. Well, here's what he saw. Here's what we all now know, thanks to the Civil Commission that just put out this report. According to the report, investigators identified at least 13 recurring forms of abuse on that day, at that festival and in those kibbutzim and to the hostages. Rape, sexual torture, shootings directed at victims' genitalia areas, and abuse carried out after death. The report also detailed cases in which serious sexual violence was inflicted in front of or involving family members, including one incident in which relatives were allegedly forced to carry out acts on each other. Further, accused Hamas and allied perpetrators of using videos, digital platforms, social media as tools to magnify psychological harm, spread fear, publicize the attacks, including by distributing sexualized material. What else? Witness testimony cited in the report included an account of a woman being sexually assaulted before being beheaded. Another witness described seeing a woman dragged from a vehicle, pinned against a wall, repeatedly raped, then stabbed, with the assault allegedly continuing after her death. In another case, a witness described discovering the body of a man whose genitalia had been severed, lying beside the body of a woman holding them, and what the report described as an apparent effort to degrade and humiliate the victims. Investigators said some female victims were found naked or partially unclothed, with evidence of severe mutilation and objects including grenades, nails, household tools inserted in their bodies. The report also cited gunshot wounds, cuts, burn injuries concentrated on intimate areas. The report said some female bodies brought to morgues showed broken pelvises from gang rapes, her legs, bloodied underwear, and additional trauma to the abdomen or groin. Former hostages, both women and men, have also testified to rape, sexual torture, other forms of abuse during abduction or captivity. According to the report, it said some female captives reported sexual assaults while receiving treatment in Gaza hospitals and so forth. And of course, we know now there was no Israeli genocide in Gaza. Even the international organization in charge of it said there was none. Well, nice to know 2.5 years later. This Hamas terrorist entity, its network is in the United States of America. And is it too much to ask the Democrat mayors in this country, particularly Mondami, is it too much to ask the Democrat senators and congressmen to do something about it? Like push them out of their party? Is it too much?
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.